Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream of Courage Counts. My name is Patrick Shelton, and I am the live stream's producer. And today we are joined by Vince Guglielmetti, and very excited to have him. Interaction is crucial for the live stream, and we would love for you to keep an eye on that chat and be engaging as much as you can, answering questions, giving us your responses. That's what the show thrives on. So thank you very much for being a part of the chat. And we will begin just in a few moments.
Hi, I'm Chuck Shelton, host for Courage Counts and the CEO at Greatheart Consulting based in Seattle. This show is an expression of why our firm exists, to develop inclusive leaders in courageous cultures, equipping people to lead through diversity, equity, and inclusion from any role. Courage Counts streams on 2 Wednesdays each month, and yes, my part of it comes from my kitchen and my kitchen table. Today, Intel executive Vince Guglielmetti joins us in the conversation as well. The show is for people who want to lead more inclusively, including white men. You may have correctly identified me as a white guy. You'll notice that Vince is one as well. We all need to find our courage to grow our careers and our results and our organizations. The show is Courage Counts. So we define courage like this. Courage is the ability to care and to act when facing fear, difficulty, pain, or danger. Courage is the ability to care and to act when facing fear, difficulty, pain, or danger. To lead inclusively is absolutely a fearsome and difficult challenge. We're seeing the way that differences can divide in the genocide in Ukraine that appears on our screens every day right now. The ways we humans handle our differences can produce danger and suffering and pain. And in organizational life, courage counts because risk is something every company manages. Courage is personal. Courage is professional. Today, here's how we're going to come at how courage counting is with a theme. Each episode has a theme. Our theme today is the superpower of inclusive leaders, how building relationships of trust and accountability. So here's how we're going to interact around the theme. I'll pose a question with Vince as we get along here a little bit. We'll post that question in the chat as well. As you hear the conversation from me and Vince, love for you to be dropping your questions into the chat, you interacting in the chat. Glad to have 2 conversations going along at the same time. And then periodically, Vince and I will check in with the chat as well to respond and to interact. Okay, so we're using the superpower language, but what do we mean by that idea? In the case of inclusive leaders, it's the superhuman ability to make humans super. Growing human relationships across identities is magic we often miss. The kindness and efficacy of the Polish people, for example, right now is a superpower. As we do this show, 100 Ukrainian refugees are entering Poland every minute. When it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, the ability to deeply connect with people across differences and in identities and as nations, that's a superpower. Today, we're going to investigate this for inclusive leaders as the power to build relationships of trust and accountability. As we're learning in this time of war, as we've been making our way through the isolation of a pandemic, we know for sure that people are social creatures. We're meant to be together at home, at work, across our lives, even if it's on camera. So everything related to DEI requires relationships of trust and accountability. Very little beyond compliance and tolerance can happen without such accountability and trust. Leaders everywhere, every day are using the words trust and accountability. But it's no small task to turn those words into what's real between us across the diversity divides. It takes heroic effort for each of us seeking to lead more inclusively. This is challenging territory for us to navigate. It's complicated. As we work on our learning today, we'll keep in mind that in every identity group, again, including white men, there's a huge variation in intersectional identities around sexual orientation, religion, language, nationality, and many other identity points. And while we're talking about courage, the images of the Ukrainian people remind us that people who are experiencing disadvantage are already showing up with remarkable courage at work and across their lives. We can see it every day right in front of us. Patrick Shelton is with us as our producer. Hi, Pat. He is intriguingly my son and a key great-hearted professional bringing some of the creative talent behind the show. There are a few things you need to know about how we operate here at Courage Counts. We respectfully observe these 2 ground rules. We're here to build relationships of trust and accountability, sounds familiar, and get things done together. And we're not here to make ourselves right and others wrong. As I've said before, this way of operating prioritizes care in human relationships and right action over expressions of disrespect and discrimination we so often see today and may be tempted toward ourselves. I encourage you to use ground rules like these in team meetings, in town halls, and in courageous conversations that you're a part of. Your tough questions and concerns will be honored and explored during the show or following it on the Courage Counts page here on LinkedIn. As I mentioned, we invite you to vigorously participate in the chat. We welcome your practical comments, your learning resources. We want to just find out how interactive this chat and this show can be. If you'd like to ask a question privately, please send us an email to the address you see on the screen. We won't identify you in any response. And if you're unhappy about something we say or something we miss, please send us an email about that or post your concerns in the chat, and we'll try and respond in show or afterwards. As I mentioned, our theme today is the superpower of inclusive leaders. I guess I should say it like this: the superpower of inclusive leaders, building relationships of trust and accountability. We talked a little bit about the idea of a superpower. Now let's define trust and accountability. Here's how we define trust. Trust is the making and keeping of promises across differences and over time. So trust, again, is making and keeping promises across difference and over time. Our organizations promise to hire and promote people for their abilities and potential without bias. For those of us who are people managers, we promise our employees that we will care about who they are, we'll coach them to succeed, and we'll do whatever we can to help them move ahead in their careers. When we keep our promises with one another, people contribute and stay. When we break our promises, our leadership falters, our influence wanes. So inclusive leaders are known to keep promises and seldom break them. Now, for accountability. We are more than 4 years into the Me Too movement and coming up on 2 years in the racial reckoning in the United States. And DEI-related controversies are on fire in cultures around the world. So this is an era of accountability. People in younger generations expect to see their employers respond effectively and empathetically to the risks in war, in climate change, in the pandemic. Leaders are required to speak to global calls for economic justice and political freedom. The expectation of conscious capitalism to do well and do good is emerging as table stakes. No one's MBA curriculum has prepared them for such accountabilities. To me, this is healthy. It's driven by the cameras in our phones and by people of all ages seeking justice in their organizations and on the streets. Accountability matters because it is a conversation about integrity, about a society or a company or a leader doing what we say we will do, keeping our promises. So we define accountability like this. Accountability is being responsible in ways that cause people to trust us. See the connection between accountability and trust. Accountability is being responsible in ways that cause people to trust us. So accountability is not about rhetoric, it's about action. Your company may declare that it will produce a new racial and gender mix among the people in the top 100 jobs. But is the organization making measurable progress in delivering on that promise and doing it while also ensuring the ongoing contribution and deepening DEI commitment of white men? That's what accountability requires. So when it comes to being an ally, we use an accountability formula like this. A man is an ally when women say he is. A white person is an ally when colleagues of color say they are. You get the idea. We don't get to declare that we are accountable. We get to demonstrate it. Others decide. And we know that accountability is real when others trust us enough to be open to our influence and to help us keep learning. It's a simple idea, but much harder to pull off, especially across the fracture lines that line up between human identity points. So, Trust is the making and keeping of promises, and accountability is being responsible in ways that cause people to trust us. For more information on this relationship between trust and accountability for inclusive leaders, there's a 10-page article on inclusion with accountability available for you to download on the Courage Counts page on the Greatheart website at greatheartconsulting.com. So before Vince and I jump into our conversation and interact with you via the chat, I want to make our goals for today's show really clear. We want you to take two things away from today's episode. First, understand what relationships of trust and accountability look like across human identities. And second, how to build these relationships with people who are similar to you and different from you. As we all learn together today, again, your part in the chat is offering your own answers, your own questions to what we're talking about. Ask us your questions, respond to one another in the chat. We'd love, again, for those dual conversations to be going on. Vince and I will check in with the chat as we go along as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest today, Vince Guglielmetti. Vince serves as a VP and Operations General Manager with a manufacturing group at Intel. He lives in Arizona, and he and I have had the chance to work together on Intel's amazing commitment to global diversity, equity, and inclusion. He also has built a stellar reputation as an inclusive leader. Vince, welcome to Courage Counts.
Hey, great to be here, Chuck. Thanks so much. And as you pointed out, I would say the feeling is mutual. I mean, the opportunity to work with you and read your books really has helped me continue to grow. Mm-hmm. So when you asked me to come, very, very humbling and super, super honored just to be able to participate in such a chat. Thank you so much.
So glad to have you here. And we're looking forward to kind of digging into the guts of how trust and accountability work to help people, all of us, lead more inclusively. So let's jump into the first question and start with a little bit about your own evolution as an inclusive leader. Talk with us about, why is leading inclusively important to you in your career, and how'd you get started with DEI?
Yeah, you bet. So, leading inclusively for me, I guess I look at it as we need to build relationships with people, and we need to do that because people really, what most want is that you care, right? And the ability to care ultimately, I look at it as inclusivity as each one of us is unique, right? So yes, there definitely are women and there definitely are men and there's definitely different groups, but the reality is even within those groups, we're all unique, right? So the excitement I get is the ability to learn from others about what their uniquenesses are and how you can, help them grow. There's a poem that I'll tell you I kind of live by. It's a philosophy. It's from a person named Marianne Williamson, and her poem is really about helping other people shine. I look at it as my whole role in life. If I really do well, I'm creating the connections with people to build trust and let them know how much I care, and then ultimately let them be their greatest person, right? Who doesn't want to be their greatest person? And that's kind of what gets me really excited. And I would say that's kind of at the base of that inclusivity, and it lines up with what you were talking about before about what trust is, because trust doesn't exist without the relationship. And I start there, and I'm very much a person. You won't find me to be a person that's, well, you have to earn my trust. I'm kind of like, all of us are here really to do good things. Unless things are really messed up, you don't have to earn it. I believe in you. And we start there. So my journey on D&I, I would tell you, was, well, I started with this basic philosophy. I also then started to engage at a group level. And a lot of it, I would say, definitely at the female level when I was on assignment in Costa Rica. And really doing some of my own reading. I read the book Lean In, learned some things there. I really educated myself. There were things I was definitely falling short in. Well, I might have been in the right places for the corporation and saying the right things and going to the meetings I should have gone to. Was I standing up the way I needed to? And I realized there was more I could do. And where the journey really started was when I started to say, no, we're going to go find more tactical females and bring them into our site. And we're going to find a path and we're going to declare it. And then we're going to go make it happen. And we did some really unique things in that space. And ever since then, I would tell you, Chuck, whatever group that I get to help with, I try to really seek to understand what the challenge is. And then from there, go and work with them to create something. Because I think it always comes back to the group and to the people. I don't really know. I'm not living their life. Only they are. And I can be a really good voice. As you said, we're white males. As white males, we got to be the big voice a lot of the time, because we're the ones in the positions that create the change.
So much about what you said I love. One is I think that your underlying orientation, I'm guessing, for your life and certainly your career has been to leadership as being focused on the other. I hear that
Mhm.
servant leader idea and the orientation to individuality, which I think all of us understand the idea that we're part of cultures and groups, and we're also completely unique, because none of us can be distilled down to some group membership. We're all a completely unique mix of aspects of identity. I love how you've tuned in on that, and I have to believe that your reputation and your commitment to DEI and the kind of the speed and the learning curve that you've been on the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. I hope it'll be an encouragement to everybody wherever we are in our learning process, that the kind of intention that you brought really opens the doors to you becoming more inclusive in directions maybe you never saw coming, because that's certainly been my experience. So appreciate that. Well, let's jump in a little bit farther into what you opened the door for in terms of your time around your work in Costa Rica. I've really been impressed with your storytelling and how your learners' orientation. So working with kind of your own nationality in view. So talk with us a little bit about this question around in your global work. What have you learned about inclusion and leading inclusively?
Yeah, so I would tell you, so a few things, right? Even before I went to Costa Rica, the role I had gave me the opportunity to go off to Asia. So I got to,
Mm.
I get to interact with teams from Malaysia, teams from China, teams from the Philippines, and I can't tell you what a great learning experience that was. In addition to what I learned in Costa Rica, and the reason for that is I think, especially if you grow up in the States, you categorize, well, they're the Asians. No, they're not the Asians.
Right.
Every one of them has a unique cultural aspect to them and how the culture actually operates. And your appreciation for those differences is very much much appreciated. So I would tell you what I've seen around it globally, right, is if you took a look, and I'll go back to your comment around Costa Rica because I spent the most time there, was you start to understand what are the social norms, what are the things that are even fighting against you before you
Mm-hmm.
go,
Right.
let's say before you go forward, like an initiative of, well, we're going to go create, a lot more technical females on an engineering site. Well, when you start to dig into the culture and you talk to the women, they're like, you don't understand
Mm.
how hard this is. The men, as soon as we enter the engineering field, the first question we get is, what's wrong with you? This is a man's field. You shouldn't be here.
Wow.
They're fighting before they get started. So the ones that make it through, great tribute to them for continuing to have the fight. And what they're looking for from you, though, is how do you as a male help change that story? How are you going to be their ally to say, no, I'm with you? These are the things we're going to go create. And there were things like in Costa Rica to demonstrate it where uh, my HR team said, Vince, you'll never get to the percentages you'll want. You can't do it. And I said,
Wow.
well, we're going to go see about that, right? And if there's if there's 1,000 engineers out there and 10% of them are female, what if all of them are qualified and I get all 10% at Intel? Why not? Let's go show what is possible. And when we changed the equation, right? When we changed the equation, we ended up driving up to like 25% to 30% of our technical workforce became female. And everybody said, oh, you broke the paradigm in our mind as to what it could look like. And the females, then the part that was beautiful about this, Chuck, is, the more females you brought in, the more they could create their own community, right? And they weren't all the same, but you didn't
Right.
go to the meeting and it was, well, there's one female, 9 males. You were driving towards 4 females, 6 males, 5, with the goal that balance created a safer environment that would build the trust, create the relationships to do all the things we talked about.
I think it's such a great example, Vince, of what courage looks like in a really practical way. It's just like whatever, especially even if you have colleagues who are supposed to know how it works, like in HR or on the recruiting side, saying, yeah, we have to kind of take the pipeline into account. So don't get too excited about the goals here and just say, well, I wonder what a competitive advantage would look like if we really went after this. And then downstream to see the impact, not only on the women who were in engineering, for example, but I have to believe that maybe some of the men who were having those responses at the beginning said, wow, we're bringing the mix that we have now with gender in view is something that is really improving how we do the engineering. So it's like there's like layers or circles that go out from those moments and those decisions.
But and one more thing quick one I'd want to add is we
Yeah.
would then have even events on site, and I would sit with some of the women and talk, and they would share with me, Ben, so here's the other half you don't understand. I just told you about the school piece. So here's what really happens. Now I get married. I'm expected to be the wife. I'm expected to be the caregiver. I'm expected to be the cook. I'm expected to be the cleaner. I'm expected, like, when you think about it in the States, right? That doesn't really fly at all. It's like, no, you're a joint effort work in this.
Yeah.
In Costa
Yeah.
Rica, they were very clear with me, my husband will stay at work till 9 o'clock. I can't afford that. That's just not in their mindset. And granted, it's a cultural aspect that I believe is continuing to mature, but it's something, if you don't really understand, then how do you help? Because then I could at least go talk to managers and say, we got to figure out how we're going to give the balance to everybody to be successful.
It's such a great example of how the culture that we're operating in, we need to be careful about not exporting our own understandings and realities into other parts of the world. We've seen that same dynamic that you just described in India as well, for example, and in South Korea and other places. So it's a good example of how our commitments to leading inclusively are global if we work in those kinds of organizations. And the way it works has to be local. Because those cultures, to ignore culture is to essentially decide to not be effective. So that's really helpful. I want to pull up one comment here, a question that Jeff asked in the chat. Do you see humility, vulnerability, and transparency as new skills necessary for leadership today? And are companies building these skills into their leaders? Humility, vulnerability, transparency. Where do you see that fitting into how we lead inclusively, Vince?
I actually see a super critical element. And you said it was from Jeff. Yeah, is that who it was? That person?
Yeah.
So Jeff, I would tell you one of the greatest things we can do as leaders is to show those skill sets. And by the way, they are muscles we're not used to. This whole thought of, right, we come in, oh, well, you're the leader of the group, you must know everything. Oh, you have to set the direction. Oh, you must do this. Oh, don't show that because that would be weakness. And yet, if you look at it, some of the best things you can do is be vulnerable in that space and, really go demonstrate to your team you don't know. I would tell you, me personally, I've taken on a lot of different jobs outside of my discipline. So I spend a lot of my time asking questions and learning from my team and showing to them, look, I'll get you whatever you need, but you have to help me really grow myself. And when I think of it as diversity and inclusion, I alluded to it with you here on the female side, on the female side in Costa Rica, where I was doing things, but I really wasn't stepping up the way I needed to. And a lot of it just had to do with the realization of I was following kind of what I thought was right versus what really was needed. And the latest one I can tell you is when I came back to the States. So I've been back in the States now for about 3 years. Yeah. And about that time, in addition to COVID, right, we had the George Floyd situation, and that really hit me hard, right? I'd been gone for so long and I couldn't really understand this. And I shared this with Chuck. One of the things I did was, all these people were telling me, oh, the Jim Crow laws, Vince, Jim Crow laws. I was so naive. I looked it up. I thought Jim Crow was a person. I was very open with my team. I really believed Jim Crow was this person that had, done really bad stuff to the South. And when I did my research and realized it really was this fictitious person that had been created, that this is what the community was. And when you went back in history and looked at, well, I grew up in a place where I was told the Civil War ended these things. Martin Luther King came in and the Civil Rights Movement happened, right. and the world is a great place. And when I dug in and I was like, oh my gosh, systemic racism, I know what it is now. And I was very open with my team. I was very open with a lot of people in Intel about where it was and trying to help create. And I created many forums to help create that education for others that I knew struggled. Because I think, that was a big deal for me, just to show that vulnerability. Sorry, Chuck, but I mean, kind of that's the example. That's where you go.
Yeah, and I think that kind of research, and particularly the stories and us being open with ourselves and our own learning, that opens the door for other people to find their courage, but also to help us find ours. Because you've said a couple of times, I felt like I wasn't stepping up. I needed to step up more. What a great practical way to talk about finding your courage. Let's go to the next question and get into trust building a little bit here. When it comes to the making and keeping of promises and building trust across differences, in what ways is trust building crucial to the way you've been leading inclusively, Vince?
Chuck, when you made a comment earlier, you said, do what you say you will do. Okay. Trust building is right. You build a relationship with people through trust, and, you follow up with things, whether you support them or you help them achieve the goals they want. But they know that whatever you say, you will go make happen for them, or you will do all you can to make it happen. And I give my people examples at times. Sometimes I'll tell them, look, I can't tell you I'll guarantee you to be successful all the time, but I will guarantee I will go have the fight, and you will know how the fight went, and maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 times I win. But
the thing I really like about
go ahead, sorry.
All right. The thing I really like about locating trust building at that kind of level of integrity, we are conscious about what we say we're going to do, and we do it. If because of a decision somewhere else in the organization or something happens, that it doesn't work out, we spend against the capital we built. When promises get broken, when we keep promises, it's so powerful. On the other side of this, for kind of flipping it around for the next question, when trust breaks, especially across some of these fracture points in identities, how do we recover? When you've made a mistake or seen mistakes made, how do we recover from that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to that transparency, that vulnerability. I've always looked at it as, you make a mistake, be open about your mistake, take responsibility, apologize, move forward. I think that shows a lot of, I'll say, what you want your team to do, to say it even creates that safe environment to say it wasn't that Vince was trying to mess it up, or a person was, but they can say, what did we learn and how do we move forward?
And I do think the trap that, and I think it's sometimes we particularly suffer as men, and I've seen this globally, is that, like you said earlier, there's this assumption that strength means you have all the answers, you never admit mistakes, you never apologize, that whole package, of kind of what it means to be a guy, and especially a guy in leadership. And it feels to me like it's such a trap when it comes to when things don't go well. Because instead of us being in that learner, other-oriented position, we're in a place where we're like defending ourselves, trying to explain, well, that's not what I meant. And it's just to be able to acknowledge that we make mistakes and then make fewer of them, so that our learning reflects that we're deepening our point of view. It goes a long ways towards forgiveness and grace and the things that we need in the workplace to get past the fear and the pain that exists so often.
Yeah, and I would say, Chuck, the other part that does, and as you spoke, reminded me, is when you're in the room with the other men and you show the vulnerability, you're never really sure how that'll be reacted to, just for what you said. Because many of those men, there has been a sign of weakness. He's too vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think that's because of the in-group conversation. I think that's one of the reasons why us learning to talk about trust and accountability out loud in group as well as across group is so crucial. Because many times across the fractures in diversity work, like around race in the United States, my experience as a white person has been from people of color. Y'all need to do your own work. Don't be asking me what you should do. You need to figure it out. Certainly with women over the years and globally, people saying, well, look, we're working hard enough to make our way in the world as women. Would you please take responsibility as men for your own work and for the work that you need to do with each other? And I think your comments right on, because it can affect how people view our careers, can affect how people want to relate to us if we don't necessarily act the way we're supposed to act. So that's a courage decision too, isn't it? When we're willing to step maybe outside some of the norms that are baked into our gender, to our culture, to our team, what we know our people making decisions about our career success might expect. That's definitely a courage calculus, isn't it? Well, we talked a little bit about trust. I want to move on to accountability, which we defined as operating in a way to improve trust in relationships. For you, when you think about accountability in a healthy way, how does accountability work to help inclusive leaders keep our promises? How do you think about it?
So it's interesting, because when I read how you define accountability, I had never seen it written that way. And I think it's so powerful, because inherently, the way I've always believed it is, it's much more linked to that responsibility you have, right? It's much more of accountability itself is, you're being responsible. I'm taking responsibility for items and being able to own them and drive them. And it's about, and I think as you described it, it's about you. The accountability where I would tell you often gets confused is, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to hold you accountable. Well,
Right, exactly.
that has a
Yeah,
very negative connotation and sends people into a spiral. But if you say, as we've defined it here, I take accountability for myself as to the things I want to go make happen, and I hold myself accountable, and all of you can hold me accountable. That
right.
changes the story significantly. So the way I see it in D&I is the same thing. Is if I tell you I'm going to go create a change or work towards create an activity or to make life better for you or
Mhm.
whatever it may be in the dialogue, it links back to that trust in the relationship, and you can count on me to do it, and that's how I hold myself accountable, and I will openly tell you you can do the same with me.
Yeah, there's a responsibility piece to this that I think it's been a learning for me. One of the reasons this definition came up is because since I've been a white guy the whole time, and an American and healthy, and from so many backgrounds of advantage, it's kind of held up the mirror instead of like holding it up to other people. It's held it up to me and said, "So
Yeah.
what am I on the hook for here?" And when you combine that with position power, it's a pretty powerful kind of accountability because
Yes.
then people, instead of saying I'm going to hold you accountable in that kind of negative gotcha way, it's the kind of accountability that says, oh, this is a way to embrace my part of it. And so next question, because this is a big issue we're running into, and so with so many, certainly with executives and senior leaders in their relationship, is we're seeing a lot of rising expectation among employees and customers that companies will respond to concerns around climate change and social justice, now the war in Ukraine and the response to Russia. How can an inclusive leader respond to these bigger expectations and concerns and keep their eye on business results at the same time? How do we do both things together?
Yeah, I think so. The part that I think really good leaders do, and I can tell you at Intel, as soon as some of the things happened in the Ukraine, we immediately
Right.
reacted with some help and how support we wanted to go make happen there. I think the first big step is you take a step. A lot of times a lot of companies will just separate and say, well, that's not me. Somebody else got to go deal with this. I think as leaders, it's the same thing on diversity, inclusion, global and social impacts. You need to be the leader to start the conversation in the way that is, I'll say, most, can be most fruitful and positive to really help us move forward. Right. And I think that's where the leaders often, somebody else will do it. You can never see it as somebody else will do it. It's you that needs to go take the steps forward. And you're the
Yeah.
one that ultimately helps us move forward to have these dialogues. And I would say one of the most interesting was a lot of people are immediately to, because Intel has people in Russia too, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
what's interesting is everybody's like, oh, well, the Ukraine, and definitely we feel for the Ukraine. At the same time, there's a lot of folks in Russia that are suffering too. And how do you because you can't categorize them all. And it's how do you help all of them?
Yeah. I mean, and that's that inclusive mindset that's complicated, even confusing, but it's also
Yeah.
generative because we're thinking in both and ways, and we're trying to tell the truth at the same time. There's some comments from Anne in the chat around the use of the word appropriate and how do we hold ourselves and others accountable in appropriate ways. One of the things that idea around appropriateness makes me think of is in a way that's accepted, in a way that opens doors and opens communications instead of either shuts people down because they're caught doing something embarrassing, or people end up being more vulnerable, too much sharing than you want. When you think about either in your own work as a leader or in the way organizations are dealing with the big issues, how do we decide what's appropriate, and how do we make that calculus, or at least experiment with appropriateness with regards to accountability?
Yeah, and it's a good question for me. And I think that it's and that appropriate, I would even say, starts with language, right? Someone's like, well, can I say that? Can I not say that? Should I say it? Right? You're never really sure in this environment what's okay. And a lot of it is the line goes is to one, getting the awareness, but even asking the folks involved about what they think might be appropriate, right? You have to gather some of this knowledge for yourself. I would say the other part is, and that's a big courage leap, right? It's some of this is really
Right.
uncomfortable, as you and I have talked
Right.
about, Chuck.
And we
And
haven't done it before.
we haven't done it before, so it's already uncomfortable. So now going to ask questions that are uncomfortable ultimately lead to that line we're talking about. Then you can start to figure out when you're crossing the line of appropriateness. Because I would say today we're very conservative, and as a society in these spaces. So as a result, you'll probably cross over instead of, wow, I never thought we could have this conversation.
Right.
I think that's powerful. And there's, the other part is there's lots of research out there that helps you too, right? If you go look, there are ways to help you get over the appropriateness and say, oh yeah, that's a really good way to have that same conversation without it sounding negative.
I really like you starting with language, and I think it's a really deft pickup for that word appropriate, because it kind of catches in the idea of it. Our conversations, hopefully, with people in communications in our business, people with our internal legal counsel, because it comes back to that what I said earlier about every company is assessing our risk. What are the risks of speaking? What are the risks of acting? What are the risks of not speaking and acting? I think that's a side that we have a lot of growth on. And I think that's where the courage part comes in, is like, how do we have short feedback loops so that appropriate we're testing. There's inherent conservatism, as you said, Vince, to how we respond to things going on in the world. I think that's fair. If you aren't doing business in Georgia, then why are you talking about voting rights there? Well, then that's a conversation, But if our employees, our customers are expecting us to find ways to lead on these issues, that doesn't mean we do it blithely or we just follow what our competitors are doing. But also doesn't mean we pretend that we shouldn't have to pay attention to it because we've never had to pay attention to it before. And so I love that. I love that call out about appropriate. It'd be great to have a conversation about, let's talk about what's appropriate. How is this landing for you? Because that's an intent impact conversation, right? Yeah, and I think we need to center courage in that conversation. I want to move on to our last question. I know we're rolling through a lot of conversations here, but it's a way to get us all thinking. You spent many years in the tech sector, and we all have a question about how can we lead more inclusively. But for you, what transformative impacts can an inclusive leader in tech have when they focus on trust and accountability? What's been your experience?
So I would, and I don't know if it's just tech or not, Chuck, because it's when you really focus on trust and accountability in the way that we're describing it here.
Yeah,
you're able to do more than you ever thought possible, right? And your people are more excited to contribute than they ever have, right? I've gone through lots of ups and downs, but even in the things that were most challenging, we fought ourselves out of, it was really the trust and accountability, when I look back at it, that let us come kind of out of that curve, right? I mean, I think I've shared with you when I was in Costa Rica, we ended up, the factory got shut down. I mean, that was a really low point for all of us. Yet we all believed and we all understood and we all worked together. And a lot of it was because we believed in each other, and it was this trust and accountability that helped us all the way through. I see from a tech company or any company, your ability to create that environment. I'm a big fan of like create, promote, allow. And if you create these environments we're talking about, people will be their best selves. And when they're their best selves, you achieve things you never thought possible as an organization. So in tech, whether it's ramping a facility faster or the ability to improve your quality, if I take it on business aspects, we do more of that in that space while we're making people feel much better about being at a place like Intel. And that's how I see it ultimately playing, because we get the best out of individuals and driving our results that we've never seen before. And people can be quite proud of what they've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I love that create, promote, allow, because it feels like that's the bridge between inclusion and innovation. It's like, here we are, here we go. We can do things that we none of us suspected. We can have conversations we never had before. We can engage the world and the expectations of our employees in ways that we have not learned how to do previously. If the pandemic has been anything, it's been a daily experience in solving our problems that seem the solution today is not the solution tomorrow. I like the question that Joey raised here. So how we maintain trust with two groups when there are competing goals like reducing carbon output and increasing products and production. I like that, what was it? Create, promote, allow.
Promote, wow, yep.
Yeah. So, because I think that's a place that builds a bridge, into more generative processes and into conversations that we're surprised that we can have when we really go at it and do it together.
And I think to Joey's question, I think that's a really good example. What we tend to see, though, are you have almost two groups that have decided both sides are right? I need this and I need this. Yeah. Yet rarely you end up saying, and both, I'll say, leaders at the top are getting held accountable for each. And it's
Right.
always, we get back to that appropriateness or that courage. Well, just go talk to each other and have this conversation about what's the common goal. And if there's something that's conflicting, let's move it to the next level of management or whatever it's going to be, to say,
Yeah.
this is the conflict and here's how far we can get. And this is what we believe is the right thing to do. But a lot of the time you get stuck and you end up kind of creating this anxiety towards each other. And I wanted to comment on your last one around how you can use the create, promote, allow. Is globally you can take it across D&I, like you said. When we have these opportunities, and they're tough opportunities because a lot of the time they're really the Ukraine, there's social, there's racist type problems that you're facing. It's how do you help people even have the conversations? And I would tell you, Chuck, that was the first thing I received when a lot of things happened in the States was, Vince, how do I have the conversation? I don't even know where to start. It went back to appropriateness. And I went out and said, here are some ways to do this as a staff. It's a safe environment. I role modeled it in my staff, but I also sent things out to people that were struggling. And that changed a lot of conversations throughout. So it is very powerful in those spaces.
It would be so easy to have a 2-hour show on this. Today, we don't have that luxury. Thanks, Vince, so much for your commitment to leading inclusively and to the way that you've offered your wisdom to us today. I think it's so clear from this quick conversation through the territory that the relationship, that building relationships with trust and accountability can create transformative ways for us to work together. As we move towards wrapping up today's show, and this idea of the superpower of inclusive leaders building relationships of trust and accountability, I wanted to just move quickly to our 5 stages tool. I'll just talk briefly and remind you that it's a way to think about your growth, where you are now, and how you can move. If we apply it to the idea of building relationships with trust and accountability, pre-awareness is that place where we're really disengaged, and we see people tend as kind of a soft skill. We tend to be deflected and disengaged. And it's especially not a high-performing place to choose to lead from when our results come from increasingly a diverse mix of employees and of customers. Its necessity is the point where we're working on awareness and moving to centering relationship building in the way that we work. We will be doing things around DEI we don't understand necessarily and didn't see coming. And we'll start to recognize that centering relationships is core to our leadership work. Again, for many roles, this isn't just for people managers. Careful skill practice is awareness to action. It's awkward. It can be building confidence, but it's a place essentially, in my experience, where we go from being kind of the risk of performative around DEI to actually showing up and making our commitments real. Activation is the point where people see us expressing the company's commitment in the way we hire and promote, the way we include people in teamwork. And people see us growing more confident in the way we lead inclusively, and also that the idea we've been talking about humility shows up there. And then in this 5-stage model, influencing is that place where people expect us to be leading with centering trust and accountability, like Vince just mentioned, where when something new comes in, it's a challenge, it's a conflict, people are saying to Vince, how do we have this conversation? That's an example of what being in an influence position operates with, interpersonally, as well as us asking systemic and cultural questions about DEI. Again, this model is a great tool for us thinking about where we are right now, for example, on building relationships of trust and accountability. What stage are we in, and how can we move ahead? So I want to move to what's next to find your courage, do the kind of learning we've been talking about today. Thanks for your participation in the chat and for attending with the show today. First thing I'd like to suggest for a takeaway, a take action, what's working well for you, and how do you use the strengths that you have to extend the way you're leading inclusively into other parts of your work? You may be stronger at taking things like age and gender into account and not understand as much about race and religion. So Vince's story was so powerful in part because you could see the arc of his learning. He moved into work across cultures in Costa Rica. He moved into gender issues as they were being faced with engineering in a tech environment. When racial reckoning came up, that was a new area of learning and an expression of transparency. The second action speaks to that, actually, is to develop your own clear point of view about trust and accountability. You can use our definitions. You can come up with your own. One of the one of the superpowers, one of the magic, part of the magic sauce in leading inclusively is that you develop a point of view where you're clear about what you mean by the words that you use, and especially words like trust and accountability that are everywhere these days, but we often aren't being really clear about what we mean and what it looks like behaviorally. And then finally, talk out loud with your colleagues about building relationships across differences through trust and accountability. That whole grounding.
Well, it's the show's producer here, Patrick. Chuck has lost connection to the stream. And so it looks like we very well may have to end it here, which is never fun. But hey, we got through like 44 of the 45 minutes. He maybe only had one more action step. And so I think what we'll do is we will make sure to get that into the chat and also onto the showcase page. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Vince for joining us today. He was our very first guest on Courage Counts, and we couldn't have asked for a better interaction and a better discussion on the chat. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'll send you off to this is our information for the next stream. You can find us at bit.ly/couragecounts to go to our website, and bit.ly/couragecounts on LI. To get to our showcase page on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, everybody.